It's Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers with tips and advice on landscaping and gardening. Here's Fernando Martinez.
Yes, indeed. Hello and welcome. Thank you for being here with me today. We've got another great topic to discuss here today. I wanted to talk about wintering your yard. Even though we are here on the Central Coast and don't get much of a winter, sometimes we do. The nights definitely get cold and we do get some rainy winters and things. And so I wanted to discuss how to treat your garden. What would you do differently in the winter? And what should you really be thinking about during those times to either prepare earlier in the year or to do and take action on while it's raining and while everything's kind of getting inundated with water and the cold spells are coming up. And so I want to go over the sprinklers and the sprinkler clocks and kind of how to address that situation, which could be the whole show could just be on that. There's really a lot to do, and I'm here to remind you and help you really get the best that you can out of your yard. And too much water can be just as much of a problem as not enough. And I think people do have a tendency to forget that. So we're going to go over all that, and also trimming. We can trim throughout the year in small cuts and light pruning, but the winter is the time to do the heavy pruning and really the hard cutting back. So I want to talk a little bit about deciduous trees when they lose their leaves in the winter, of course, and grasses, true grasses, and how to treat those in the winter. A little bit on roses. Roses aren't quite as popular as they used to be. I love them. I have tons of roses, but even flower carpet roses and some shrub roses and things can be treated slightly differently in the winter. I want to talk about fruit trees and just kind of go over that, and also drainage. It's a very important thing. Then as we take on these jobs throughout the year, I'm always thinking about drainage. What's going to happen in the winter? What's going to happen when it rains? Let's say you get that 30-year, floods or whatever, where it really rains heavy, or if it rains a lot in a short period of time, where's the water going to go? Where's it all going to be? How's it going to affect the landscaping? So I wanted to talk about that. And then finally, we will get into a little bit of frost, how to protect your plants, and what types of fertilizers do we use in the winter time as that would be different than any other time of the year. So let's get right into it. We got a lot to discuss. Let's start off with sprinklers and talk about turning the clock off. I have experienced over the years in my time being out and dealing with clients and giving advice on sprinklers I've experienced a reluctance to turn the clock off, for fear that if I turn it off, I don't know what's going to happen. Something might die. I feel more comfortable if it's just watering all the time. But in reality, you could be doing more damage to your plants, including your grass and any drought-tolerant plants that we plant a lot of. And there are a lot here in a lot of gardens. And they really don't want a whole lot of water and can have adverse effects if we continue to give it to them during the winter in conjunction with the rains. Now, the rains is perfectly normal, and even the native plants will learn to expect that. But if you do that in combination with leaving the sprinklers on, that's when I think you start running into problems. You can form things like root rot. Plants don't do as well. The leaves turn yellow. They don't look as lush and healthy. They can lose a lot of leaves. They can struggle. And if you get a plant that's struggling, then you hit it with a hard frost. You give it too much fertilizer when it's not trying to grow, and you can get this kind of perfect storm and really do a lot of damage to your plants and hurt them, or they could struggle coming back in springtime and summer, and you might not have as good a luck. So do not be afraid to turn that clock off in the winter. Just turn it off. If you get a rain for a few days, if it rains for 2-3 days in a row, you can leave that clock off as long as a week, 2 weeks. If the night temperatures are still cold, or maybe even if it's cloudy days, or if the sprinklers have been going on a normal summer watering schedule and you haven't changed your clock and it's cloudy during the day, even if it doesn't rain and it's really cold at night, the thing about it being cold at night is the soils take a long time to dry out. because when we have the warm days and warm nights, the soil can dry out pretty fast and you can water pretty frequently. You still, I don't know of any schedule I would recommend necessarily every day. There's always exceptions to rules, but watering every day is usually not necessary. So no more than once every other day, 3 times a week, 4 times a week, stuff like that. But during the winter, you could have a schedule of 1 day a week or 2 days a week. Certainly not unheard of, or just turning the clock off. And if it's been really soaked and the nights are cool and it's cloudy days, wait until everything dries out. It could be as long as a week, could be as long as 2 weeks. And even if we get no rain during that time, just wait and watch the plants. If they're still doing good, they still look healthy, and the grass is still doing fine, there's no reason to turn it back on. And you can dig around in the soil a little bit and make sure that things are still moist and leave that clock off. And what we're trying to do is trying to get that soil to dry out before you water again. So, it's kind of hard to program a clock to not come on because it has to come on once a week, at least is usually the least amount you can program it. And, so that's why the turning it off is the best solution. And definitely having, a rain sensor makes sense, so you don't have to worry about turning it off before rain. But even with my rain sensor, after 2-3 days, it comes on and my soil's still wet. I'll just go there and just turn the clock off, and I'll leave it off for 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks. If it rains one time in between that 2 weeks and the nights are still cool and the day temperatures aren't really hot, and it fools us sometimes. So you really have to go by the weather. If it's 85 degrees in December and the soil's dry, well, you have to water. If it stays like that for a week, you might have to go back to a summer schedule for that week. So that's kind of what I want you thinking about when it comes to these clocks. Generally speaking, you're going to be cutting it way back in the winter, and please don't be one to just leave your clock on the same schedule all the year round, whether it's raining or not, what the temperature is. And if nothing else, just do that, turning it off and then turning it back on if you don't want to program it. A lot of clocks have a percentage button on there where you can cut the whole clock without having to program it down by a percentage. And then if you do that, you can even keep the days the same. Let's say you're watering 4 days a week. And I'm saying don't water 4 days a week in the wintertime. But if you're doing it, but you're at 50%, 40%, 30% of your watering, the number of days doesn't matter as much anymore if you really cut the time back. So there's different ways to approach it, and that certainly is a legitimate way. I like that percentage keys that some of the clocks have, and you can just reduce everything. And that way you can leave the clock on, still feel good, and know that everything's getting some water, whether it needs it or not. And you just use that percentage. And that's exactly what some of the sensors do for you. The one that I have on mine, it just controls that percentage. It brings it down, or it'll raise it up. Actually, it'll go even over 100% during the summer. So it's really nice. That one is by Hunter. It's called a Solar Sync. But again, even with that, and for my taste, it waters too much after rain. I still turn my clock off. So let's go into trimming. And I'll tell you how trimming kind of ties in with that. Is what we're trying to do is get rid of some of the branches and leaves and clean things up out from underneath there. If you have a big pile of leaves that have fallen off throughout the year at the base of the plant, and I know we usually put, thick layers of bark, and all this is designed to hold the water in the soil. So the winter is a great time to clean all that stuff out, kind of push the bark back a little bit from the root ball, trim out some of the branches, give it some more air, let that plant breathe, and it allows the sun to filter through the plant and get down to the roots and help dry those roots out, especially after a rain. And if it's rained a lot and for a few days, the idea is we're trying to get these plants to dry out. And so, if you're doing all those things and the sprinklers come on, it's like, you're taking 2 steps backwards. So that's why I'm saying this whole turn the clock off, trim the plant up a little bit, get the leaves out of there, clean up. And grasses, you can cut the grasses way back. You can cut them down. All true grasses will actually go dormant in the winter if it gets cold enough. I've seen some years where it's really warm through the whole winter and they won't go dormant, but I cut them back anyway, kind of force that dormancy because I want to see that new fresh grass come out, in the beginning of the springtime. And so true grasses, you can cut them back down to the ground 2-3 inches. So don't forget about that. If you have grasses in your yard and it's winter time, go out there and cut those puppies back before they start growing in the spring. Because if they start growing in the spring and then you're going to try to cut them back, you end up cutting off the new growth. There's no way you're going to go in there and individually cut every blade of grass out to cut it down and leave the new growth somehow. So I have a couple miscanthus grasses at my house I cut back twice a year. They grow so big so fast during the summer, and towards the end of the summer, early fall, they kind of look raggedy because they've been growing and the wind beats them up, and I'll cut them down to the ground and they will grow up again and be a big bush. And then by the time winter comes, they get that same look. So you could even cut your grasses back twice a year. Now, roses, which I absolutely love, one of my most favorite plants in the world. There's so many different types. So whatever, I know that word roses has a connotation sometimes, and people, I don't like roses, but it doesn't all have to be the upright, the big thorny hybrid tea roses, the classic rose that you think of, but it certainly could be. But there are flower carpet roses, there's shrub roses, and so roses can still be used in the landscape without doing a lot of maintenance. But a rose is a rose. So when it comes to wintertime and you want to do the right things for your plants and you want to keep things healthy and growing, you can cut a flower carpet rose back hard. And this is the time to do the hard pruning. The rest of the year, it's not a really good idea to cut them too hard because in the spring, they're getting shooting out all this new growth and all these blooms, and and a lot of times they'll get a lot of buds on them and everything, and then it's like, this plant's too big, I'm going to cut it back, and you end up cutting all the buds off and you lose the flowers. So the best time to cut back plants that are too big and they've already bloomed and they kind of look, you can see kind of the finished flowers on there and they aren't looking that as good as they were. This is the time to get in there and cut them back a little bit farther than what you want them to be, so that when spring comes and the plants grow out, they will grow out to the size that you want them to be, with the buds and the flowers and everything will be blooming. So cutting the roses back, if you're into the hybrid teas and the grandifloras and all the beautiful, gorgeous roses, there are pruning techniques for that we could go into, but this is the time to do that. And I like to let them rest first, early winter, late fall. Stop pruning off the dead flowers. Let the rose hips form. That kind of goes for most plants too. You can just kind of let them rest a little bit, because if you prune too early and you spark new growth, because pruning encourages new growth in the plants, and if it comes back too soon, let's say we get a warm week like I was talking about in Christmas or something, the plants think it's springtime, they'll come back. So let them rest a little bit first and go maybe towards late winter, really early spring, and all this pruning advice I'm giving you, that's a great time for that. And again, it lets the sun in. It gets, a lot of times roses can get diseases. They'll have, powdery mildew or black spot or aphids or whatever it is, and they can live in the dead leaves at the base of the plant. So that cleaning of those leaves out at the base of the plant and kind of raking up and letting the sun hit that, the top of the root ball, and airing out the plant and cutting out any branches that are crossing or anything that's really dense inside the plant, and open it up and get that airflow going, it's going to help fight the disease and insects. And if there's old disease on the leaves down at the base, they can splash back up with rain onto the plant and continue infecting the plant. But if you get them out of there, put them in a plastic bag in the garbage or in the green waste or whatever, get it away from there, the roses are going to have a much easier time staying healthy and staying without disease. And it lets that sunlight in, lets that air flow through, and your plants will thank you. They will be healthy. You'll be loving them. They're going to be blooming and, looking really good in the springtime. So that's the whole idea with that. Now, drainage, I always say what we do when we go out to landscape a yard more than anything else is grading and drainage. Because without that, I don't see how anything works. It's all not worth anything if you have all this beautiful stuff and puddles or water going back towards the house, or giant planter beds sitting in water and the plant suffering for it, because it basically water, even though it's H2O, there's hydrogen and oxygen, but oxygen is not available for the plant. Just like us, if we're underwater, we can't access that oxygen. So you're kind of depleting the plants of oxygen by letting water sit and having those roots saturated. And I tell people all the time, when you take bark and you get it wet and you leave it wet, or you let wood stay in standing water, it gets really soft and smelly and rotting, and that's exactly what can happen to the roots. So we have to get that water away from the base of the root plants and get it out of the area. So drainage is huge, and whether that means adding in actual drains or doing French drains or whatever it is, however you can divert the water from going there, you're going to find out in the wintertime while it's raining. Walk around the yard and see. I really like doing that, especially on heavy rains when I know there's going to be a lot of water coming down. I'll put my raincoat on and I'll literally walk the yard and make sure, are my rain gutters working? Are the drains working? Is everything flowing? Is the end of the line of my drains it clogged with leaves and things from the whole year that I don't know, we can try to stay on top of everything throughout the year, but there's so many things in life to do. You get busy. I mean, are you really cleaning the leaves out of all your catch basins? Hopefully. But if you're like most of us, including me, they all end up down at the end of the drain line where the water's trying to come out. I have a little pop-up valve at the end of my lawn, my property, where everything drains out to from all my rain gutters, all the catch basins where all the water's caught. It sends it out to the one pipe. So I go out there and make sure that water's flowing out of there. Very important, because you can have all the drains in the world, but if it's clogged and it backs up, they're worthless. It's like having no drains. So especially if everything's there and the infrastructure's there, you might as well, that'd be the first thing I would check and make sure that that's cleared out. And you can simulate it if you don't want to do it out in the rain like me with the raincoat on. You can take a hose at any time of the year and just run it down any drain, start at the farthest one away. And sometimes there's T's and lines going out, and try to hit them all and just kind of make sure water's coming out at the end there, especially if you're going to tie into a drain. We do a lot of drain work where there's existing drains and they want to add a drain here, add a drain there. I always test it. I'll grab a hose, I'll put it in there, I'll let it run. I'll say, okay, where's it supposed to be coming out? I'll go out there and I want to visually see water coming out. I want to see clean water coming out, and I want to see it running readily, at a decent speed. And then I know that drain's working, and then you can add to that drain and, address the issues as they come up. But drainage, very, very important. And talking about the rain gutter downspouts, if you have drains and your rain gutter downspouts are not tied into them, tie them in to the downspouts so that all that water doesn't go out into the planters. Or a lot of times I see them kick out right at the foundation of the house. And I see, 2-story home with all this weight and, the whole weight of the house on that corner, and all the water from the roof is spilling out right there at the base of the foundation. Not a good idea. So take that, put it in a pipe, run that into your existing drains, and get that water out of there. So that's what I want you to really be thinking about during the winter, adjusting the sprinklers, setting the clock, turning it off mostly if needed, trimming things up, getting the dead leaves out of there, letting the sun in and trying to get the soil to dry out as best it can, and really looking at all the drainage and where's the water going. And if there is standing water and puddles, address those. Hopefully with real drains. That's probably my first choice. The French drains where you dig a hole with a rock, kind of my last choice, because I'd rather get the water out of there rather than encouraging it to stay in the ground. Or you can direct it to an area where a hole where you dig rock. That would be a better French drain, in my opinion. So anyway, we'll be right back on the other side of the break. You can always check us out on the web at ilovetokomehome.com, and all these radio shows are here for you to listen at your leisure on YouTube. Just type in Chaparral Pavers. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on California's Central Coast. Here on 1240 AM and 99.5 FM, KSMA.
Chaparral Pavers. I love to come home.com. Imagine the flickering flames and warmth of a fire pit, soothing sounds of trickling water, decorative lighting, highlighting your landscape at dusk. Driveways and patios, not only functional, but a work of art. This is what Chaparral Pavers does for your landscape lifestyle. You'll love to come home. Chaparral Pavers. Visit us now at ilovetoComeHome.com.
If you're thinking about installing a new paver patio or paver driveway, check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetoComeHome.com. Serving the Central Coast since 2001, Chaparral Pavers will work with you to get it right and complete the job to your specifications, as customer service is king at Chaparral Pavers. Paver driveways are stylish and durable and guaranteed to never crack. If your old concrete driveway or entryway is a hazardous cracking mess, it's time to call Chaparral Pavers. Go to their website, ilovetoComeHome.com. You'll find all the information you need. Check out photographs of past installations and reviews from Central Coast residents who have used Chaparral Pavers. And don't forget, all installations are guaranteed for the life of your home. So check out Chaparral Pavers online at ilovetoComeHome.com. Chaparral Pavers, they'll make you love to come home. Now, back to Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers on KSMA.
And we're back. Okay, we are talking about wintering over your yard in this mild winter climate that we have, but it does change somewhat, and the plants will, it'll take its toll on them if we don't do the things that we can do to help them out and to keep them healthy and keep our yards looking nice and draining correctly. And so we're talking about the sprinklers, turning your clock off, cutting that water back, using that percentage key on your clock to lower the percentage of water that you're putting out in the winter. But really one of the best things to do, and I mean this, is just turn it off as long as you can before you have to turn it back on once the soil has completely dried out. And keep your eye on the plants and make sure. But again, if you're one of those that just has to have that clock on to feel good, then use that percentage key. Go all the way down to 10% if you have to. Cut it by 50 first and see how it works, and then keep going down until you really feel it needs more. And even the rest of the year, knock that percentage key down a couple percentage points. Try going through spring at 80%, 70%. If the yard still looks good, and I'm talking grass, plants, everything across the board, we all have a tendency to overwater, I think, and just to err on that side. Most plants will tolerate it, but if you do that while in combination with the rain, that's when you really start to run into trouble, and you could lose plants, or plants don't do as good, or rot can set in, or if a plant's in a weakened state, it'll be more susceptible to disease. It'll be more susceptible to frost, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, and more susceptible to bugs. I mean, I don't know what it is, but when a plant's stressed, bugs seem to attract to it. I've seen it time and again. And also trimming. Great time of year to trim everything back, get all the dead leaves out of there. I was going to mention camellias. I love camellias, and there's a lot of camellias planted out there. And if you have some, and you see the flowers starting to turn brown on the edges, they get what's called bud blight. And sometimes it'll happen on the buds before the flower even blooms. But as it blooms, it's kind of, it's mostly brown instead of pink or red or whatever color your camellia is supposed to be. If you leave those spent flowers and those petals and leaves on the ground at the base of the plant, when it rains, it will splash those spores back up on there, and that bud blight will continue on that plant. So one of the best ways to prevent disease and bugs is to prune the plants, thin them out, clean up all the dead matter and leaves and, around from that area, let it dry out and leave nice clean bark or rock or whatever's at the base of the plants. Drainage. Oh my goodness. You cannot have a beautiful, wonderful, love to come home yard without really good drainage. So if you want to be a happy fool like me with your raincoat on, walking around during the rain, checking all the rain gutters, making sure the drain's not clogged, it's a fun time. Or you can simulate it earlier in the year with a hose and clean everything out and make sure all your drains are working. And even if all your drains are working and you see trouble spots where water wants to sit and things change over time, so keep an eye on it every year and add drains, add little catch basins in. And you can clean the catch basins out. Hardly anyone I know does that, but it is a good practice to, they're called catch basins for a reason, because the drain inlets at the base, and you'll see them, they have the green lids on them with the little slits in them mostly, or if you have channel drains along your driveway, if there's screws in there, you should be able to unscrew them, or sometimes they'll just pop out. They could be stuck in there for being in there for a really long time. You might need a screwdriver or a pry bar. But take those lids off and clean out all the, the sediment and any branches or leaves or anything that's gotten through there that would potentially clog the lineup, because they're called catch basins because there's a little bottom, 2-3 inches of space at the bottom of it where it's above the tube. The drain itself, the pipe that's coming in, is above that. And so that the sediment can be caught there and that can be cleaned out before it gets into the pipe. So yeah, if you're on the ball, you can clean those out throughout the year as needed. And then, like I say, run the hose and make sure the end of the drain is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, frost, not very often, but when it does happen, and if you have frost-sensitive plants, not all plants are susceptible to frost damage, but quite a few are. And you'll know which ones those are by the effects of the frost after it's happened. Yellow leaves or burnt-looking leaves, or it kind of looks like they've wilted over. And then take precautions next time when you know a heavy frost is coming. Put stakes in the ground first before you put your plastic or your tarp over, so that it's not touching the leaves. Anyway, that's all the time we have for this week. Thank you so much, and always check us out on the web when you get a chance at ilovetoComeHome.com. There's links to all the radio shows there, and of course on YouTube at Chaparral Pavers. See you next week.
This has been Patio Side Chats with Fernando Martinez from Chaparral Pavers. Go to ilovetoComeHome.com to find out more, or call 805-588-6917. And be sure and tune in next week at this same time for Patio Side Chats here on KSMA.